Welcome to the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix review, and I'm warning you now, I'm going to be ranting. Yes, hello everyone, welcome back to BaxtyB F1, and today we are going to be talking about yesterday's Saudi Arabian Grand Prix. And it's safe to say, quite a lot of nonsense happened. Let's get straight into the results. And you'd be mistaken for thinking that this is a complete carbon copy of the preview thing I did. And you'd be right, that is exactly how I predicted it. Perez on pole, Perez winning, Verstappen second, and Fernando Alonso third. But that does not tell the whole story. First of all, Max Verstappen only qualified in 15th after a drive shaft failure in Q2 left him stranded. He got back to the garage, but he couldn't do any more, so he was stuck in P15. Perez did take pole. Fernando Alonso did finish third, but then he was demoted to fourth, so George Russell was third, and then the stewards realised they got it wrong, so then we had Alonso back up to third for his 100th career podium. So you know what, all three of these guys put in amazing drives, but we're going to talk more about that as time goes on. So here are the main talking points of the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, and the first one is the Fernando Alonso penalty mess. And oh my word, what an absolute disaster this was for Alonso, for the FIA, just, oh my word, this was a disaster. So, what happened? At the start of the race, Alonso lines up P2. He qualified in third, but because of the grid penalty for Charles Leclerc, who qualified P2, Alonso was promoted to the front row. Alonso takes the lead off of Perez into turn 1 and leads for the first few laps before he is then subsequently passed by Perez, who pretty much drives off into a lead of his own to win, though there is a safety car and we're going to get to that shortly. But all of a sudden, very quickly, it becomes clear that Alonso has done what Esteban Ocon did in Bahrain. He didn't position himself correctly in the box and he took a 5-second penalty. But when we saw what happened, it realised that Fernando Alonso was about 3 inches off to the left of his box rather than being sat in it. Not too far forward like Ocon was, but just 3 inches to the left. And subsequent pictures have shown that other cars were just as far out as he was and they were not getting penalised. So again, poor stewarding from the FIA. Now, personally, I feel that Alonso should not have had a penalty at all. What possible advantage does he gain by being 3 inches to the left of his box? Is he going to get better grip? I doubt it. So I don't understand why the stewards felt the need to penalise him. But it gets better. So there was a safety car, and on lap 19, Alonso came in with a host of front runners to pit under the safety car. Now you're probably thinking, in the past the rules have been that you can't serve a penalty under the safety car. This has been changed. It is 100% legal. Alonso was fine to do this along with Aston Martin. And he served his penalty. He came back out in a very decent position and absorbed the hit of the penalty. But this is where things get messy. A few laps out from the end, George Russell in 4th place gets a message from his team saying that Alonso may well get another 5-second penalty. And it is believed because, like Ocon 2 weeks ago, Alonso and his Aston Martin team had worked on the car too quickly. So Russell's given the hurry up. Alonso's told, look, just keep that gap to Russell just over 5 seconds so we can guarantee ourselves the podium. He does that and he finishes third. But we then hear that the stewards are subsequently looking at Fernando Alonso and Aston Martin for not serving their time penalty correctly. At which point the penalty then comes through, but this is after the podium, so Alonso stood on the podium, Russell misses the podium moment, Russell is promoted to P3, and Alonso is then in P4 because he is given a 10-second penalty for not following the initial penalty, exactly the same as Esteban Ocon. So how did this penalty come about? Well, basically it came about because the FIA race control, that's like the VAR system in Geneva, initially said, along with the stewards, that penalty has been served properly. They then looked at it again towards the end of the race and realised, oh, we don't think it has been served properly because the rear jack of the car is touching the car, therefore they're working on it. So, Alonso is then given the penalty. He's quite angry about this in the press conference, understandably so. And considering that he shouldn't have had this penalty in the first place, what on earth were the FIA doing? So Aston Martin appeal the decision. They appeal the decision and say, look, the stewards have got this understanding that only the front jack can touch the car because it's used to bring the car into the box. But that should also apply to the rear jack. We're not lifting the car up, we're just positioning it, getting it ready, so that when the 5 seconds has elapsed, we can just lift the car up. And they showed other examples of this, about 7 examples of other cars from other seasons that have done this and got away with it. And therefore the stewards were like, okay, this is new information, this means we have to investigate, and they overturned the decision. So Fernando Alonso gets to keep his P3, which of course means, like some of us in the Lewis Hamilton community, thinking maybe you could do that with Abu Dhabi, maybe? Anyway, just saying. But yes, what an absolute joke this was by the FIA. When you have said that the penalty has been correctly served, and then right at the end of the race, you had a whole Grand Prix. He served his penalty on lap 19. This was a 50-lap race. Why are you waiting until 48, 49 to realise, oh, hang on a minute, I don't think he served it properly? It's an absolute joke. And then Aston Martin have exposed a loophole in the rules that it's like the any does not mean all lapped cars, or, just because it's the front jack, why can't it be the rear jack? Which is absolutely legitimate from Aston Martin. So there needs to be an investigation into this, because we've had 2 races where teams have been penalised for working on their cars too quickly. Now, presumably, this is what happened to Alpine back at the Bahrain Grand Prix. So surely Alpine can now go to the FIA and say, well, hang on a minute, you incorrectly applied a 10-second penalty to our driver, which then subsequently led to another penalty because he sped down the pit lane. That wouldn't have happened if you hadn't have given him that 10-second penalty. So the FIA absolutely need to clarify this and find a way of making it easy for the teams to understand. The race have done a brilliant video on this where they explain everything very clearly, and then even give the FIA the right rule. Basically say, you can't touch the car other than the front jack. It's so simple! It is so simple! And yet the FIA couldn't get it right, and it screwed over Alonso, and it screwed over Russell, and it was just, the whole thing was a complete mess. But that isn't the end of the FIA nonsense and clown show essence to them. Because you know how I said that he pitted under a safety car? Well, let's talk about that safety car, because that safety car shouldn't have happened. Alonso's teammate Lance Stroll has to retire from the race because his brakes are starting to smoke. And you hear the message from his team, stop the car safely. And you can see that Stroll is not parked anywhere on the track. He's gone off the track, basically gone straight to the marshals so that they can work on his car. He's pretty much driven it as far off the track as he could, and yet the steward and the race director still put out a safety car. And we're all looking at it going, why have they put a safety car out? And then even Martin Brundle is going, why have they put a safety car out? And then the FIA released a statement during the race saying that, oh yeah, we put out the safety car because the GPS showed he was still on the track. You're going blindly off the GPS? What about all those screens that you have available to you? Like, what on earth are you doing? You have all of this technology. Use your eyes. Don't rely on the technology of the GPS. Use your screens. Use the onboard cameras. It boggles the mind that they could be this dumb. I mean, seriously. And this screwed over any kind of strategy in the race, because when you get a safety car at a track like Jeddah, you absolutely have to take that free pit stop. It screwed over Lewis Hamilton's strategy. It ended up screwing over Ferrari, which we're going to talk about. But just the level of incompetence here. Like, the FIA have had a quiet few weeks. Mohammed Ben Sulayem has stopped being an idiot and has taken a step back, and it's taken you 2 races to act like a bunch of morons. A bunch of morons. Oh, right, anyway, so I'm going to give myself a break from ranting and I'm going to talk about Red Bull very quickly, and I've titled this Red Bull Beef because Sergio Perez won the race, and you know what? Amazing effort. He lost the lead at the start, but just used the pace of that RB19, which is an absolute rocket ship, by the way. Ridiculous levels of pace. And he controlled the race, even after the safety car. Max Verstappen had got up to P4. That safety car really benefited him. And he was actually able to gap Max Verstappen whilst he was passing the cars in front of him. I think it was Alonso he had to pass. I think he had to pass Russell as well. So he passes both of them, starts going after Sergio Perez, but that gap doesn't get any lower than 4 seconds. And they're lapping pretty similarly. I think Verstappen was generally maybe a tenth quicker, but then there were points where Perez was quicker as well. So Verstappen knew he wasn't going to win the race, and he was struggling with his dry shaft again. He could feel it as he was driving, so he pretty much conceded defeat at that point. But in the closing laps, he started saying to his race engineer, what's the fastest lap? At this point, Perez had the fastest lap, and he would have been on to lead the World Championship for the very first time in his career. But on the last lap, Verstappen does a 1:30.19, and that takes the fastest lap away from Perez. And Perez was annoyed that he didn't get it, but the team didn't tell him on the radio who got it. Then he gets told in the interview that Max took it from him, and then he had a quick chat with Max, and it was a bit of a back and forth, and Perez feels that he'd been told to just coast home. He was told to push, but I think he was told not to save tyres. I think more that message from his engineer was, and you could tell that he was pissed off with Max about that. That he was in a really, really bad mood, even though he's won the race, and brilliantly so, probably the best win of his career of the 5 that he's taken. So yeah, he was pretty miffed, I think, about that, and rightly so. I mean, Max was a bit of a dick. It was a dick move, but when you know that your closest challenger for the title is going to be your teammate who you've pretty much owned for the last 2 years, you know the games that you need to play, and I would expect any driver to do that. I would expect Alonso, Russell, Hamilton, Leclerc, Sainz. I'd expect them all to do that in that situation. Still, it's a bit of a dick move, but you're getting yourself a little bit of a win over your teammate. Your teammate may win the race, but you can just take that little bit of satisfaction. And also, it kept Max Verstappen in the lead of the World Championship by 1 point. But as I said earlier, Verstappen was in P15. And he was able to work his way through the field, and he did so because the Red Bull DRS is ridiculous. It was really strong last year, but my God, it's a rocket this year. The way in which he went past Lewis Hamilton, I mean, honestly, when the Red Bull opens its DRS, you're better off just staying out the way, because it's inevitable that they're going to pass you once they open that DRS. They're gaining something like 20 kilometers an hour, 20 miles an hour. I can't quite remember the right unit of speed, but that's ludicrous, and it seems dodgy to me. I mean, I'm not implying anything, legal defence. I'm not saying the Red Bull DRS is illegal, but there's a lot of people advocating for reg changes. Now, some people want major reg changes. That's never going to happen. But if you want a reg change that penalises Red Bull, you've got to find something with the DRS. And I hope that the FIA and F1 are looking closely at Red Bull's DRS and saying, look, how can we put a regulation in place that will affect them, and it allows other cars to actually be able to defend, because DRS is only supposed to help you overtake. It's not supposed to guarantee the overtake. And with the Red Bull right now, you are going past. It is literally a free overtake every time you get within a second. It is absolutely ludicrous, and I think that is something that needs to be looked at. But first of all, credit to Adrian Newey and his design team. They've clearly found a solution to maximise DRS, but it does seem a little unfair that they are that much quicker with DRS. I mean, George Russell said after Bahrain that Red Bull could win every race, and with that DRS, it's very possible that they could. I think the only way they don't win every race is if they have mechanical failures, and that is not a good place to be in for Formula 1 in 2023. Okay, I've had my ranting break right now, but I'm going to have to go back to my rant because we got to talk about Mercedes. Now look, Mercedes finished P4 and P5, Russell 4th, Hamilton 5th, And actually, considering where the team have been, that's actually a really good result. Coupled with the Lance Stroll DNF, they're actually level on points with Aston Martin. So as a Mercedes fan, I'm happy to take that. But there was controversy, and unnecessary controversy, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to throw my fellow, well, not all of them, but some of my fellow Lewis Hamilton fans under the bus. Because it was after the safety car period, both Hamilton and Russell pit. Russell pits from medium tyres to hard tyres, and Hamilton, who started on the hards, which I think was the wrong decision personally, but I don't know that much about F1 strategy, I just can comment on what I see. He pitted from the hards to the mediums, and he's behind Carlos Sainz actually. He comes out behind Carlos Sainz ahead of Charles Leclerc and then jumps Carlos Sainz pretty quickly and then sets about going after George Russell. And you think on medium tyres, fresh medium tyres, he would be able to make an impression on his teammate, and he does get to within a second. But this is where things get controversial. Sky Sports, David Croft and Martin Brundle were given the information that a team order had been given to Russell to move aside and let Hamilton get after Alonso. But then Russell was then quoted as saying, well, I want to try and catch up to, or keep myself close to Alonso because of his penalty. And this is the original penalty, not the subsequent penalty. And then Mercedes go, well, he's already served it. Now, first of all, why Mercedes aren't telling George as soon as he comes into the pits, right, this is Alonso serving his penalty? I don't understand that. But anyway, as soon as he gets that message, he essentially drives off into the distance and leaves Lewis in his dust on harder tyres. And this is where things got messy, because there were Lewis Hamilton fans who, look, they were working off the information that they were given, who were slandering George Russell all over the place. And they were calling him a snake and everything else. Look, this is Formula One. Drivers want to beat each other, and especially their own teammate. And, you know, they're saying, oh, George should have played the team game. Lewis was on the fresher tyres. He could have caught up to Alonso. Lewis could have had a podium. Let's be frank here. The Mercedes was not in Alonso's league in this race. Even if they had let Lewis through, I don't think he would have caught up to Alonso. Let's be frank. He was not catching up to Alonso, particularly with the pace that he showed in the latter end of that race and the way that he dropped off from George. But then it was clarified that there were no team orders. And I was actually running a Twitter space last night, and there was a George Russell fan in there who was following George on the onboards, and I said to them, was George given an order? Because you can hear the team radio on the onboards. Was George given a team order? And they said no. Sky Sports clarified this. They also said no, there was no team order from Mercedes to George Russell. So, and then yet people are still criticising George and saying, oh, well, he should have let him through anyway. No, he is under no obligation to move for Lewis. No obligation to move. Just because it's Lewis behind him on fresher tyres, Lewis still needs to get close enough. And when Lewis was within the DRS range, he couldn't get close enough. Mercedes do not have the Red Bull DRS, and he could not get close enough to him to make that pass. And the treatment of George Russell from certain elements of the Lewis Hamilton fan base was wrong. And I think we need to take a long, hard look at ourselves and realise that, okay, George was quicker on this day, you know, and just because Lewis is Lewis, he can't be given preferential treatment. He's got to earn it. Even now, as a 103-time Grand Prix winner, 7-time champion, he's still got to earn the right to get past his teammate. So, look, we've not covered ourselves in glory in the Lewis Hamilton fan community. We really haven't. We must do better. And George is not at fault for what happened. He was not given a team order. Why should he move over? But Mercedes are not entirely in the clear here, because they actually gave George and Lewis wrong information at the end of the race. Oh yes, because we only heard about the potential for Alonso penalty when Mercedes told Russell Alonso might get a 5-second penalty. And then once he had been given that 5-second penalty, that's not right. That's how we heard about it. But Lewis wasn't told that Alonso might go. Well, he was told he might get a penalty, but he was not told to stay within 10 seconds because Mercedes thought that they were going to be working with a 5-second penalty, and Lewis was far enough back that it doesn't matter. But Alonso was given a 10-second penalty, and Lewis finished 10.2 seconds behind him, so he didn't gain any positions. But yeah, I was hearing things about Bono not giving Lewis the right information. Bono didn't have the right information, so he couldn't give Lewis the right information. Mercedes clearly hadn't seen what had happened to Ocon 2 weeks previously and made the mistake. And that is on Mercedes. That is why Lewis wasn't able to initially gain that place after Alonso was given his penalty. Obviously, he would have lost it because Alonso was reinstated to P3. But the not slander, but the incorrect criticism of Bono because he wasn't giving Lewis the correct information. Bono can only work with what he has. And I'm certain that a race engineer and driver pairing that have worked together for 10 years and have won 6 world championships together, I'm fairly certain that if they knew the full information, Bono would have said, Lewis, get within 10 seconds of Alonso, you can gain a place here. It's just obvious. It's obvious. Mercedes haven't covered themselves in glory, but they didn't give a team order to George. The abuse of George is wrong, and also the criticism of Bono is unjustified because where the criticism needs to go is to Mercedes, not to Bono, because Mercedes clearly didn't understand the penalty that was there. Now, I want to try and get to the drive ratings as quickly as possible, but we do need to talk about the Ferrari struggle. And the problem with the Ferrari had was they had no pace, apart from in qualifying. Charles Leclerc, sensational qualifying. He got that car to within a tenth of the RB19. Now, that was in the hands of Sergio Perez. I dread to think how far ahead Max would have been if he'd been able to get into Q3. Because, at points, he was a second quicker than the closest car, non-Red Bull car. So, he probably would have been about at least half a second, if not more, ahead of the nearest non-Red Bull car. It was frightening pace that Max was showing at points, but unfortunately that's the way motor racing goes sometimes. But Leclerc had a really good race, he fought his way back up, and Ferrari, to their credit, nailed their strategy. They stayed out longer than Lance Stroll. They dummied Lance Stroll, who they were racing with at the time, into taking a pit stop. They both overcut him, and then the safety car happened, and unfortunately that absolutely screwed them over. And Ferrari didn't cover themselves in glory here because we saw the replay. Hamilton was able to come out. He was behind both of the Ferraris at this stage, but he was able to come out behind. Hamilton was ahead of Leclerc and behind Sainz. Of course, as I said earlier, he passed Sainz very quickly after the safety car. But we then heard the radio message where Ferrari, you've got Leclerc's race engineer going, oh yeah, push on the safety car line because Hamilton's coming out. And Leclerc's like, why are you telling me this now? You should have told me that 10 seconds ago. I would have then pushed and I would have been able to get ahead of Hamilton, but instead I wasn't able to, and I've lost a position. And then he spends the whole race stuck behind Carlos Sainz. And look, the Ferrari clearly has some pace to unlock. I think Ferrari and Mercedes have both got pace to unlock, and I think by the end of the season they will both be ahead of Aston Martin. But again, Ferrari just finding ways to hurt their drivers, and I tell you what, Charles Leclerc did not sound happy. He really did not sound happy. I think I know there's rumours that he might leave Ferrari, but if there was ever a beginning of the end, I think this race was it. So, a quick one on the fight of the day. I thought the fight of the day was actually between Kevin Magnussen and Yuki Tsunoda. Yuki Tsunoda had a brilliant strategy, got him up to P8, did really, really well. He dropped down to P10, held off Magnussen for a long, long time, but Magnussen got him right near the end of the race, and we got that exasperated call from Yuki. But for Yuki Tsunoda to be even contesting a point is an over-performance and a really good effort, and that will be reflected in my driver ratings. And my pass of the day was one near the start of the race. Lance Stroll put a beautiful move on Carlos Sainz. Just a really well-executed overtake, and you won't see many better across the whole season. It was a fantastic pass. So, without further ado, I think I've spoken for long enough on my topics. Let's get into the driver ratings, and remember, my word is law. So here we are, driver ratings. I'm going to try and get through this quite quickly. Max Verstappen, I'm giving an 8. Obviously, the qualifying issue was not his fault. That was the car wasn't working. Yeah, he did brilliantly to come up to P2. Didn't quite make the progress I thought he would actually early on. I thought he was going to scream past, but once he got DRS, it was just inevitable. He was going to go past as many cars as possible. he was voted driver of the day. I have no complaints about that. It was a very, very good performance by Max Verstappen. But just because I think A, he was a bit slower going through the field than I thought, and then B, he wasn't able to catch up to Sergio Perez as quickly as I thought he would, and actually didn't get close to him in the end. I'm going to give Max an 8 out of 10. Perez, yes, he lost the lead at the start, but he regained it pretty quickly. And this was a magnificent drive by Sergio Perez. He was pole as well. He did everything that Red Bull needed him to do this weekend and more. And for me, it's easily a perfect 10. Charles Leclerc gets an 8, mostly for his qualifying. His race pace was excellent, particularly on the soft tyre, and actually was conserving those soft tyres really well. He was able to run a lot longer than I think Ferrari expected him to. And as I said, to get within a tenth of that RB19, that was a magnificent qualifying lap to get P2, but obviously he did have the penalty, so he started all the way back in P12. Carlos Sainz, solid midfield, really. Not midfield, but sort of middle of the top 10. Yeah, he didn't really threaten much. Was stuck behind Lance Stroll for most of the race. Ferrari gave him a good strategy, and then the safety car kind of screwed him over a little bit. Was powerless to stop Hamilton going past, but showed decent pace, kept Leclerc behind him. It's a solid 7 for Carlos for me, I think. George Russell. Russell was brilliant in qualifying. Really very strong qualifying. He started P3 after qualifying 4th. Fantastic performance. He was quicker than Lewis the whole weekend. The way he gapped Lewis on harder tyres shows a real level of quality there for me. So George Russell gets an 8. Lewis gets a 7. It was a steady race. I think he was hampered a bit by his strategy. He looked punchy when he needed to. He didn't lose many positions, in fairness to him. He had a really good go at it. And there was nothing really he could do to stop Max Verstappen going past him. 5th was about as good as he could have hoped for, really. He got that. It's a 7 out of 10 for me for Lewis. Esteban Ocon is clearly the biggest improver of the weekend. It was a brilliant performance by Esteban. Alpine clearly took a step forward. He finished P8. It was a really strong race. Had a nice little battle with Pierre at one point as well. He came out on top. And the perfect recovery for him after the disaster zone that was Bahrain. And Gasly again, just really steady, better qualifying this time. He got into the top 10. He was slower than Ocon, but he had a good start. Had a little battle with Oscar Piastri, which I'll speak about in a sec. But this was a really good race for Pierre Gasly, and I think Alpine to score double points is exactly what they need in their fight against who we believe is going to be Alfa Romeo, who, let's be frank, had a stinker. Oh, McLaren. Oh, Mrs. BAXTY's just started supporting you, and you are not having a good time with it, are you? Lando Norris probably had the worst weekend of his career. Made a mistake in qualifying, braking his car, hit the front left, which broke his suspension. And then he damaged his front wing at the start and was stuck at the back for the whole race. That McLaren has got no straight line speed at all because they were struggling to pass on Williams at points. He had a nice little fight with Piastri at the end of the race, but Piastri came out on top because he had more pace. But he gets a 5 from me. Oscar, I would have given a 7 had he not made a mistake at the start of the race. And unfortunately, kind of left him a bit compromised. So I am giving him a 6, which, is probably about as harsh as I'm going to get, because Oscar was fantastic in qualifying, got that car into Q3. He's very good around Saudi. But that mistake he made in lap 1 with Pierre Gasly that broke his front wing was careless. And I know he's a rookie, so you can kind of excuse it a little bit, but he should know better. He should have got out of that one with Gasly and tried to get him at another point, but it left him near the back of the field. He was also a little bit screwed over by the safety car, but he fought well at the end with Lando and did get ahead of Logan Sargent as well. So a decent effort by Oscar, but it's a 6. It's really hard to give him higher than a 6 at this stage. Valtteri Bottas, he had a torrid weekend, didn't qualify well. He was out-qualified by Zhou Guanyu. I think he had a problem on his car because he was stuck at the back and just was making no impression even on soft tyres. He was about 30 seconds back. It was horrible race for Valtteri Bottas, and I can't give him more than a 5. He'll want to forget about this one pretty quickly. Zhou Guanyu out-qualified Bottas, but again, didn't have the greatest race. He was in the points at one point, but yeah, he kind of fell back a little bit as quicker cars got the better of him. Finished P13, not his finest hour. It was an okay effort. As I said, he did out-qualify Bottas, and that gets him a 6. Fernando Alonso, I have to give him a 10. I don't think he should have had the penalty, so I'm not going to hold that against him. And actually, the way in which he kept pace with Perez and Verstappen after they passed him, he wasn't able to do it for very long, but he was able to just keep himself in touch, and it kept him ahead of the Mercedes and the Ferraris behind. It was a masterful display by Fernando Alonso. I can't actually find any fault in it, so I have to give him a 10 out of 10. It was an amazing performance. Fully deserving of a 100th podium as well. He's only the 4th or 5th driver to ever do it, so huge congratulations to Fernando, and I'm actually enjoying this career renaissance that he's having since he joined Aston Martin. Lance Stroll, decent qualifying, okay race, wasn't able to make much of an impression on George Russell, was looking good, but Aston kind of screwed him on strategy as well. He'd fallen behind both Ferraris and then his car gave out, but from what we saw of Stroll, it was a good effort. It was a good effort, but he gets a 7 from me. Magnussen and Hülkenberg, they are looking very interesting. So I'm going to take a quick sip of water. They are looking very, very interesting because Hülkenberg is consistently out-qualifying Magnussen quite comfortably, but Magnussen is beating him in the races. And that's why I've gone for Magnussen to get 7 and Hülkenberg 6, because Magnussen actually scored a point, whereas it was Hülkenberg who started in the top 10. And it's on the Sunday where the points are scored. Look, Hülkenberg in qualifying is fantastic. Magnussen is better in the race, and he's the one that is getting Haas closer to the points than Hülkenberg is. Hülkenberg was slightly compromised by the safety car, but this is an interesting driver lineup, and that is definitely one I am going to be keeping an eye on across the season. Yuki Tsunoda and Nick de Vries. Yuki was one of my drivers of the day. Really fantastic effort. AlphaTauri nailed his strategy, and he held on for so long to try and get that point. He was beaten by a quicker car in the Haas, and you know what? He took advantage of good strategy and outperformed his car. And he is beating Nick de Vries quite comprehensively at the moment. Everyone said de Vries was going to kick his backside. It's the other way around at the moment. Fair play to Yuki. He has been fantastic. De Vries, on the other hand, hampered by engine problems across the weekend. He didn't get much running on the Saturday, and then he spun, and his race pace wasn't particularly brilliant. He was okay, not great, and I have to give him a 6. The Williams drivers, I had to think long and hard about this one, because Alex didn't have the greatest qualifying, but looked better in the race and showed some decent pace before he too had to retire with brake issues. And he was nearish the points, but not that far off. It was a very decent effort, and he deserves a 7 from me. Logan Sargent is an interesting one, because Logan had the pace to get into Q2, but his lap time got deleted, I think, quite harshly. And then he lost his head a little bit. I think he would have got an 8 if he hadn't lost his head in qualifying. But he did really well in the race, and his car kind of gave up on him towards the end. He kind of lost his tyres, and I think Logan had a really good effort. Was fighting with the AlphaTauris and the Haases and the McLarens. Had a really good time of it, but unfortunately he did drop down. I think he finished P15, I think, in the end. He was ahead of Norris, I know that for sure, but wasn't quite able to get near the points on this occasion. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that concludes the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix review. I have gone on for quite a while, but there has been quite a lot to talk about, especially with FIA stewarding decisions and Mercedes and the fan base not acting in an appropriate manner. Oh boy. Look, if you have enjoyed this video and you want to let me know how you feel about it, comment below, let me know. Happy to discuss things with you. If you're a Lewis Hamilton fan who disagrees with my viewpoint, that's absolutely fine. Just keep it civil in the comments. And if you want to see more BaxtyB F1 content, you know what you need to do. Hit the subscribe button below, bell notification on, and also please do like this video, because that helps algorithms and gets my content to more people. But until next time, guys, stay safe, and I shall speak to you all very, very soon.